Well, I want to begin by asking you a very deep spiritual question. You ready for it? We're going to go there right off the bat. You ready? Here it is. What's your all-time favorite movie? What is that movie for you that it just moves you, it inspires you? It's that movie you just keep coming back to over and over again. You know, it could be one of those epic movies like Hoosiers or Saving Private Ryan, Braveheart. Or for you, you might be the sappy romance kind, you know, where your favorite movie is The Notebook or even Titanic, which is interesting. I think I'm one of the few people on the planet who hasn't seen the movie Titanic yet. Let me tell you one of my favorite movies. And I couldn't come up with one. I'm one of those that has like 4 of them, you know. But I have one of my favorites, and here's how you know it's one of my favorites. If I watch the movie, I can just give you the whole movie by heart. I don't even need to watch the movie. I've watched it that many times. One of my favorite movies is this movie right here, Rocky IV. Now, I know there's like 55 Rockies, you know, but this Rocky IV is by far the best. And if you've never seen Rocky IV, here's how it kind of plays out. Rocky eventually fights the Russian Ivan Drago, and it's like a big deal. It's like East versus West, and the movie starts out where Drago kills Rocky's best friend Apollo Creed in the ring, and he's devastated about the whole thing, so much so that he decides to fight the man who has never been beat. And Drago is bigger and stronger than Rocky in every single way. I mean, he's stronger physically. He's a better boxer from a technical standpoint. I mean, how can Rocky win? No one thinks that he can. The only way that Rocky can win is if he goes into the ring and he takes punch after punch. And when he goes down, he's able to just fight through more pain than his opponent does. And he's able to get back up. And he's able to do this round after round after round. Well, if you haven't seen the movie, you can kind of probably know what happens. That's exactly what happens. Rocky keeps getting knocked down, but round after round, he gets back up. And he gets knocked down, and he gets back up again. Until the very last round, he knocks his opponent down. And his opponent doesn't get back up. And as a result, Rocky wins. And that's why we love Rocky, right? What's your favorite movie? My guess would be one of the things that all our favorite movies have in common is the main character had to push through some sort of adversity in their life. I mean, that's why those type of movies, they inspire and move us so much. Forget about movies for a minute. I want you to think about the people in your life, the people that you look up to, that move you, that inspire you. My guess would be that they are people who have been knocked down by a storm, but they keep finding a way to get back up again. Well, today we're continuing in our Eye of the Storm series, and over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about how when a storm hits our life, our tendency is to ask this question, and it's a great question: where's God? And so we're just carving out some time, and we're looking at this question. And throughout this series, we have been learning to live in what we are calling the eye of the storm. And in a hurricane, the eye is the middle. And it's this part where there is complete calm, but that calm is surrounded by a storm. And what we've been saying is, this is the image we want all of us right here to keep in our mind. Because as a follower of Jesus, Jesus actually invites us to the eye of the storm, to this middle part of the storm, where in this storm we can experience peace and calm, even though our life is anything but calm. Now, next week, we're going to shift gears, or at least it's going to feel like we shift gears as we talk about how do we walk with other people in our lives who are going through a storm. And so we're going to do that next week. Hope you'll join us next week. But today, we are going to talk about something that we all need to develop if we're going to live in the eye of the storm. And this word that we're going to look at, this is something that all our favorite characters in our favorite movies have. Rocky, my boy, definitely had this, and we looked at this last week. At least we scratched the surface. Now we're going to go much more in depth with it this week. Here's the word that we're going to look at this week. Grit. Grit. So what is grit? One definition of grit defined it this way: the strength to stand up one more time, then you get knocked down. And I can't think of a better time to talk about grit than right now, because when a crisis hits our life, we tend to get knocked down more than usual, so we need more grit if we're gonna continue to get back up. And so here's what I want you to walk away with today. Here's our big takeaway for the day, and it's this. It's grit is required for greatness. That if you want to accomplish anything significant in your life, if you're a Christian, if you want God to do significant things in your life, it's going to require grit, because we're going to get knocked down and we have to figure out how to push through and get back up again. And let me tell you why. And to tell you why, I am going to quote the great philosopher, Rocky Balboa. And here's what Rocky Balboa said. And here's what's great. He actually said this to his son in like Rocky 56 or whatever the movie was. But now, just a side note. I got a couple side notes for today. I'm just going to tell you this. As a side note, as I was reading this all week, I kept trying to do the Rocky voice. All right, I was like, "Oh, Adrian," and it's just awful, you know. And so I wanted to read it in the Rocky voice, but I couldn't. So I need you to hear Rocky reading it to you as I'm reading it to you, all right? So I'm gonna read it to you. Here's what the great philosopher Rocky Balboa said to his son. Let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it'll beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. Very inspiring and encouraging, isn't that? And then he says, you, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life, but it ain't about how hard you hit. And this is such a great line. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving. That's how winning is done. And I just love that quote, because Rocky says something that all of us have experienced in life. And that is, life is full of storms. No one is exempt from storms. And so we have to develop grit to survive and thrive in the storms. The Bible actually talks a lot about this whole idea, because every spiritual hero, they faced significant storms in their life, and so they needed grit so they could experience God's purposes that he had for their life. In fact, there's actually an entire chapter in the Bible that lists what I call the Rocky Balboas of the faith, the heroes of the faith. It's found in the New Testament. It's a New Testament book called Hebrews chapter 11. If you never read it, you should read it. It is really, really good. But in the chapter right after this, listen to what the writer of Hebrews says. And keep in mind, this is coming right after listing the heroes. Okay, therefore, that we've listed all these heroes, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. And the writer of Hebrews points to something that we don't often think about. And it's just kind of this really cool thing where there is actually a group of unseen people that have followed Jesus, that have already gone before us. And they're the cloud of witnesses. They are cheering us on as we run our race. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Now, this word here, perseverance, is where we get the word grit. And we see throughout the entire Bible that this idea comes up over and over again, but they use different words. They use words like to stand, endurance, or perseverance, but all of them capture the same idea of grit. Scientific research has actually begun to catch up with this whole idea of how important grit is in our life. One of the leading researchers on this is a lady named Angela Duckworth, and she spent some time at the University of Pennsylvania. She spent her entire life studying grit, which, if you can imagine that. And she actually wrote a best-selling book, and the book is called, and I would really recommend this book. It's really good, Grit: The Power of Passion and Perseverance. And let me just summarize her book for you. If you look at your life and you wonder how you're going to be successful, what is the one thing that you need to be successful outside of following Jesus? It's not your talent level. It's not your IQ. It's not your physical fitness. It's not even your emotional intelligence, which all those things are really, really important. That the data and scientific research shows that the number one determining factor for success is grit, how gritty we are. You know, Angela did all this research where she studied different fields, different professions. One of the professions that she studied was people that decided to enlist in the Army Special Forces. I mean, this is the elite of the elite. I mean, their training is so rigorous that most people, they don't make it. And so she asked this question: why do some people make it and others don't? And so she began to study people before they enlisted. And she looked at every area of her life, their IQ, their leadership skills, their upbringing, and she even looked at their grit, which I didn't know this. You could actually take a grit test, which sounds horrible when you think about it. You know, it just sounds painful, but you can actually take a grit test, and she found by far the people that make it all score high on the grit test. And she looked at many professions, and the same pattern happened over and over again. You know, even Jesus, he talked about this whole idea of grit. One time he said this. He said, hey, stand firm and you will, I love this, win life. And this stand firm, it's the same word that the writer of Hebrews used when he said perseverance. What's Jesus saying? Get gritty and you will eventually experience purpose and significance in your life. Or as we said last week, in the storm, God wants to work in you so he can do something significant through you. Now, if you don't believe the words of Jesus and you don't believe the scientific research, I want you to think about your own experience for a minute. Think about your own life. I bet every single one of us knows someone who is just uber talented, uber gifted, but they didn't go very far in their life. They underachieved. Why? Because they lacked perseverance and they lacked grit. And they just gave up early. You know, grit is such an important thing. And I was thinking about this. This is such an important thing when you think about it. I mean, this is kind of make or break for us in a lot of things. This is my first time ever giving a message on this topic, but it's that important. As I've looked back over the last few months, just in my own life, I've realized that I could develop a lot more grit in my own life. And not just in the big things, but even in some of the smaller things. In my household, with a particular person, my wife, I can tend to be considered, rumor has it at least, a little bit whiny and over-dramatic with some things. One of the things that I might be a little whiny and over-dramatic is the thought of going to the doctor. Not a big fan of going to the doctor. So a couple weeks ago, I was going to a consultation to see if I needed surgery on my back. And I talked about my back issues last week, and so I had this consultation scheduled. Now, I've never been to a consultation for surgery before to see if I need it or not, you know. And so the week leading up to it, I was an absolute basket case inside. I had all these scenarios that I kept playing out. Here's kind of like how most of them went. Most of them went like this. I'm going to go in there, and they're going to call me in, you know, and they do the weight and height and all that stuff, you know, and they're going to go, man, you are a fit machine. And, you know, that was kind of in my story at least. And then I sit down, and the surgeon's going to come in, and he's going to look at me, and he's going to go, oh my gosh, you need surgery right now. And they're going to strap me in a chair, and then they're going to stick a tube down my throat. You know, I'm not sure why I need the tube, but I'm going to need a feeding tube for some reason. And so then after that, they're going to stick a bunch of needles in my arms, and then eventually I'm going to get knocked out, which is interesting. I kept thinking my neighbor's actually being trained right now to do that very thing. And I thought they're going to bring him in, you know, and he's going to be like, now I can finally get back at you for all these years, you know. And so I'm going to get knocked out, and I'm going to have a surgery happen where something's going to go wrong, and then I'm going to get up, and I'm never going to be able to walk again. And that scenario just kept playing over and over. It was so bad, I postponed the consultation for 2 years. 2 years. And what was interesting is I was sitting in the waiting room, I was working on this very message, which is kind of funny in itself. Here's the interesting thing. I realized that I just need more grit in my life. And so I don't think it's just me. Let me ask you something. What area, just one, what area of your life do you need to develop some godly grit? Maybe it's work. And with all that's going on, your workplace has changed, things are different. Maybe you're even working from home now, and you're frustrated and you're discouraged. Or it's in your marriage, and your marriage is going through a very dark and difficult season right now. Or maybe it's the kids, and virtual learning has not only taken a toll on them, but it's taken a toll on you. Or you're dating someone, or you wish you were dating someone, and you're just going through the season where you go, I don't know how long I'm gonna do this anymore. I think I'm gonna start lowering the bar. Or you're a student, you're a middle school or high school or college student, the whole virtual learning thing, you're just not connecting with all that. Or you're right now struggling with an addiction, and you just keep getting knocked down and knocked down and knocked down to the point where you're going, I don't think I'll ever be able to get up again. I don't know what that is for you. But what I want to do for the next few minutes that I have left is I want to give you a couple principles that'll help you develop some godly grit in you, because we can't live in the eye without it. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go back to the passage that I read earlier in the book of Hebrews, but I'm going to use a paraphrase translation of the Bible called The Message. And this is such a great translation of that passage. And here's the Message translation of that passage. Do you see what this means? All these pioneers who blazed the way, all these veterans cheering us on, all these people that God used in significant ways. These were trailblazers. It means we'd better get on with it. Gosh, I love that. We better get on with it. Strip down, start running, and never quit. Assumption is this, this is so powerful, that the people that they were just wrote about who were heroes of the faith, at one point, every single one of them wanted to quit, which means we are in that very same place. So we're gonna go through points where we wanna quit. Now, another side note, okay? All week as I'm reading this translation and I'm reading Never Quit, MC Hammer's Too Legit to Quit just kept popping through my mind, just too legit to. If you're under 35, you're like, what? You Google that. We'll have a good laugh about that later when you see the pants. Okay, never quit. No extra spiritual fat, no parasitic sins. Well, how? Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race. I love this. We're in. Study how he did it, because he never lost sight of where he was heading. He was very focused on the goal. That exhilarating finish in and with God, he could put up with anything along the way. Well, okay, what did he have to put up with? And then I love this. He just kind of puts this first thing there, which is a mic drop, the cross. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, if I told you what all went into that, we'd be like, I'm okay with me right now, all right? I'm good with that. But it's like he started with the cross, and then there's more than that. It's like all the deep shame that went with that we can't even imagine, and whatever. And now he's there in the place of honor, right alongside God. When you find yourself, and listen to this phrase, flagging in your faith, once again, how real is this? This is, hey, if you're doubting, you want to walk away, you're struggling right now to make sense of things, you're in very good company. He says, here's what I want you to do. Go over that story again, item by item. That long litany of hostility, he plowed through. And what a great close. That'll shoot adrenaline into your souls. So, if you're going through a storm, or you're going through a very challenging season in your life, or you got something challenging in your life right now, and you're starting to doubt God, you want to walk away from God, or you've just been knocked down and you're not sure if you can get back up, or if you want to get back up, but you know you should, how can we get more grit? Let me give you 2 principles for getting godly grit in your life. Here's the first one. We develop grit by looking to Jesus as our example. One of the pushbacks that people have towards Christians is that they think Christians are soft and they're weak. Here's the thing. I just disagree with that. And I think history disagrees with that. Because you can't study history without coming to the conclusion that true Jesus followers were some of the toughest, most heroic, grittiest people on the entire planet. Why is that? because their leader that they follow was the grittiest leader in the entire planet. You know, many of us have this picture of Jesus, and we have this picture of Jesus because of pictures that we've seen of Jesus, and the pictures are always, perfectly, perfect face, and the hair's perfect and all that stuff. And he looks really mild and meek and like, oh, shucks, And let's be honest, our picture of Jesus is he's a wimp and he's weak. But no one exhibited more grit in the entire world than Jesus had. He faced more emotional, spiritual, and physical pain than anyone has ever faced. So if you want grit, follow Jesus, because you follow the grittiest leader that has ever lived. This is why we say you need to surrender your whole life to Jesus, because if you want to develop that kind of grit, we have to have the one who epitomizes grit living in us. As I said earlier, Jesus just talked about the reality of storms in our life. One time to the disciples, he said this, and I love this because he just shot straight with them. He says, in this world, you'll have trouble. And he said this before he went to the cross. But take heart, I have overcome the world. Hey, you're going to have storms. They're going to hit. There's no such thing as storm-free faith. And so if you go into this expecting that, you didn't get that from me. You're going to have storms hit. And so you're going to need grit. If we look at the life and teachings of Jesus, here's in a nutshell what he said about storms, and because of that, why we need grit in the storms. Here's what he said. He said, God sometimes delivers us from the storm, but more often, he carries us through it. Now, I don't know about you, I want this first part. It's kind of like you pray and it goes away. But the reality is, and experience tells us, that hardly ever happens. This second part right here is how it happens. And that doesn't make a lot of sense for us until we look at what we looked at last week, and that is God has a larger purpose in our pain. And here's one of the larger purposes for our pain, and it's this, is that growth equals pain. I want you to think about any area in your life right now that you want to grow in. Here's the reality. It's going to take pain for that growth to happen. And I wish I could, give you something else, but the reality is there's no other way around it. And this is such an important thing for us to understand, because I want you to think about this. I want you to think about almost any area in your life that you want but don't have. That's good. You know what it requires? It requires you to step outside your comfort zone. You see, because if you wanted it and it was inside your comfort zone, you'd already have it already, right? But anything good in our life, it requires us to step outside our comfort zone and into God's ultimate design for us. Now, here's why most people don't step outside their comfort zone. And it's because there's a price for that. Give me some examples. If you want a great marriage, a great marriage, there's a price to that. And you know what the price is? The price is sacrificing your needs, your wants, your agendas, your dreams, and having your spouses first. Now, here's what's comfortable. My needs, my wants, me. If you want to gain financial freedom, you want to get out of debt, you want to start honoring God, there's a price to be paid for that. And here's what the price. You may have to sell some things. You may have to downsize some things. You know what comfort is? Just continue to live as you always live. Just continue to live as everybody else lives. Hey, if you want to have a close relationship with God, where God really does do something in your life and you experience what you were created to do, there is a price to be paid for that. And there's a lot of prices to be paid for that, but one of them might mean that you get up earlier than normal so you can begin to carve out some time with God to make God more a part of your day. Now, here's what's comfort. Sleeping in, hitting the snooze button 12 times, and so you can continue to sleep in. But it's not going to take you where you ultimately want to go. See, anything that we want in life that's good that we don't have, it requires us stepping outside our comfort zone. And to step outside your comfort zone, that will always require grit. I love what the Apostle Paul, he wrote about it when he said this: may the God who gives endurance, there's one of our words again, who gives grit. In other words, God is the ultimate grit giver. In fact, as you read other things with Paul, he was basically saying, hey, when you think about God, God loves to get gritty. He loves it. So, may the God who gives grit and encouragement. Now, when we think about encouragement, we think of someone that looks at us and we're about ready to do something, and on the outside they go, you can do it, and then have at it, and I'll just keep clapping you on. This is different. This is this idea where not you can do it, we can do this together. Encouragement, give you the same attitude of mind towards each other that Christ Jesus had. In other words, if you want grit, it's one of those things, if you ask for sincerely, God will answer that prayer every single time. Now, that's the first principle, but we need more than just that. Here's our last principle. And that you want grit, you got to surround yourself with other gritty people. Just surround yourself with some gritty people. This leverages what I call the proximity principle. And most of us here, we know this principle, even though we may not call it this. And it's just, you become like the people you surround yourself with. If you're a parent, you know how important this principle is. And the same thing is true when it comes to our faith journey. It kind of works like this. This is why we want every single person to have a few faith-building friends in their life. If you have 2 or 3 people that are in your life and they're committed to growing and building in their faith, just by sheer proximity, it will motivate you more to grow and build your own faith. One of the ways that we do that here is we want everybody to be in a Ridge group. And so if you're not in a group, we're gonna have someone come up and talk about how to do that. I hope every single one of you that is not in a group will take this step because of this very principle right here. If you're just kind of investigating the whole Jesus thing and the Christianity thing and all that stuff, and you have all these questions, this is why we want you in an Alpha group. Alpha explores the big questions of life. And so in the past, you've explored faith things, and it was like, well, I've got this question, and maybe you looked on YouTube and did a couple things, but you're like, I don't want to do that anymore. You get around people like you who are exploring questions like you. Now, you are more motivated to take steps in your faith that you weren't taking before. If you're single or you're married and you have in relationships, you've got knocked down and you get knocked down and you got knocked down so much so where you're not sure if you want to get back up again. You start getting around a group of people that are committed to fighting for relationships just as you are. Just by sheer proximity, you will fight longer and harder because of it. Let's go back to the financial situation again. Maybe for you, you're just struggling with your finances. And you wanted to get out of debt, you wanted to create margin, you wanted to honor God, but you're not disciplined enough, you don't know how to do a budget, you don't do any of these things. This is why we want every single person that's in this area to go through Financial Peace University. You're around other people that are doing the very same thing by sheer proximity. It'll motivate you more to do what you couldn't do on your own. Small groups are one of the best ways to develop more grit in your life. Because when a storm hits, our tendency is to disconnect. We disconnect from God, we disconnect from other people. But you get a group of people around you that are committed to doing what you want to do. By sheer proximity, you will go further with them than you would without them. One of my groups of faith-building friends is a small group of pastors. There's 4 of us, and I've talked about them before. They are they're lifesavers for me. And there's just something about, for me in the position I have, just being around other pastors where they can connect and we can connect at that level and open up about that stuff. Well, a couple months ago, I called one of them, and I called them because I was going through my own rocky season, and I just kept getting hit and knocked down, get back up, hit, knocked down again, and I was just going through a slew of storms. And finally, I got hit once, and I was like, man, I'm not sure if I want to get back up now. And so I called him, and I said, hey, have you ever felt like quitting? And he laughed, and he said, actually, I have. And you walked me through why not to quit about a year ago. You probably don't remember that whole thing. And then he just began to say some things. And he said this, he goes, we're all going through these storms together. And then he said, here's what I want you to do. And he gave me some very specific things that he wanted me to do. And then I got off the phone. And here's the thing when I got off the phone. The storms didn't clear. The storms were still there. In fact, they intensified a bit. But now, because of him, he spoke into me and he gave me some grit. In other words, I was motivated to get back up. And here's the thing. I don't want to think about how that story might have ended differently without him. You know, maybe you're going through a storm, or you're going through your own slew of storms right now. And it's like you just keep getting hit and you fall down, you get back up, you get hit again and you knock down. And now you're like, I don't know if I want to get back up anymore. And you're thinking of walking away from something. Maybe you're thinking of walking away from your spouse. You're walking away from your family, from your kids, from school, from a career, from a calling. Maybe you're thinking of walking away from sobriety. Maybe you're thinking of walking away from your small group, from using your gifts and talents and abilities to serve other people. Maybe you're thinking of walking away from God. Maybe, even maybe, you are thinking of walking away from life altogether. Would you be willing to ask God to give you grit? God, I don't want to get up. I don't want to keep going. I don't want to push through this. I don't want to work it out. I don't. Would you ask God to give you grit? I'm going to pray for us in a minute. And I'm just going to pray that you would have the courage to do what God is clearly speaking into you. And you don't need me to tell you what that is. You know what that is. It's very clear. So much everybody bow their head and close their eyes. And Father, across the board, there is an area in all of our lives, whether we're going through a storm or not, there's an area in our lives where we could develop more grit. And God, that takes all kinds of different forms for us. Maybe it takes just the form of we just become apathetic, indifferent, we justify things in our lives. Or it's very clear, we just want to quit. Don't want to do it anymore. Just want to give up. Father, I thank you that the heroes of the faith, they were by far perfect people, by far from being perfect people. They struggled and they wrestled. They wanted to quit just like all of us do. And yet, because they leaned into the grit giver, which is you. And now for us, we follow the grittiest person that has ever lived. And that is your son. God, we look to him and we ask for that godly grit that is beyond what we can do on our own, the strength to keep going, the wisdom to keep going. And Father, I thank you that when we ask for it, you'll give it to us. Father, I pray for steps that need to be taken. I pray for things that need to be done. I pray for those that have maybe never connected with other people and got some other people in their lives, gritty people. They're going to go, come on, let's go. Let's do this thing. God, it's a lifesaver. It's a life giver. It's because that's how you created things to be. We need each other. Father, thank you. Thank you that we get to talk about this topic, such a small word, but the power and the impact behind this word, God, the ripple effect will ripple into generation after generation. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.